A frequently cited article on why Wayland sucks is Wayland on NetBSD Trials and Tribulations. This is from 2020, and at the time, it was generally correct. There were some things I disagree with, but it was fine for 2020. But Wayland changes quite rapidly, and nowadays it's pretty out of date. And just a few days ago, there was a follow-up post not about Wayland, but about X11, Xorg on NetBSD, the state of things. Now I know this isn't generally a BSD channel, but it's always fun to see what's going on the other side of things because we're all really running the same software. There are a couple of little differences like core util stuff and things like doers exist over on OpenBSD, but for the most part, the software we run is the same software, and one of those pieces being Xorg. On the Linux side, Wayland has been very heavily adopted. Now, the numbers are a bit weird because no one actually does proper telemetry, and the best you really get is polling. It seems to be somewhere in the range of 40 to 60% Wayland, which is a big swing, but it's still a lot of people. NetBSD, the same can't be said though. There are a lot of differences from how NetBSD and the typical distributor ship Xorg. For one, we ship it as an optional monolithic package rather than separate individual packages. This means every driver is included on every system rather than as an optional module. Sometimes this means we need to fine-tune driver selection to ensure the correct drivers are loaded on the correct hardware, since multiple conflicting drivers can claim a video output. This also means all of the random little tools that are usually shipped on Linux as additional packages are shipped as part of the Xorg package. Things like Xterm and random other little things like that. Now, I can't find a good explanation on why this is the approach they take. I guess it does make it easier to manage the packages, but that's pretty much as far as I got. We also want sensible fallbacks, since if you're using a GPU from the future with an old OS version, you probably want X to seamlessly fall back to a regular frame buffer, as opposed to nothing happening and you have no video output. Secondly, the way our Xsource repository is set up, it's effectively functioning as a fork of Xorg that regularly pulls from upstream freedesktop.org but does not push back. This allows X development to happen as part of NetBSD. This is in some ways similar to what OpenBSD does with the Zenokara project. This is a kind of soft fork of Xorg where they add in additional patches to fix things with Xorg that frankly should not work the way they do, but the difference is on some occasion they do push back upstream. Whereas here, this one, they don't, it's just their own local fork. Thirdly, we use our own build system based purely on BSD makefiles, not Xorgs based on GNU AutoTools. This fits well with our build.sh cross-compilation system. This is going to make it a lot easier to fit into the rest of their build infrastructure, and if they need to go and add new files into the build system, they understand how to do so because that's what they work with other things in their build infrastructure. We have a number of drivers which have not made their way upstream. Perhaps the most ubiquitous of these is XF86 Input WS, a driver that came from OpenBSD, targets an API from NetBSD, and continues to be developed in both. This is a generic input driver that can support any pointing device that the kernel supports. Unlike XF86 Input Mouse, it doesn't assume the device is a mouse and can support advanced touchpad and touchscreen features. Over here in the Linux land, this would be done with libinput and XF86 input libinput. Other NetBSD exclusives include XF86 Video PNOS. This is an X11 driver for the SparkBook 3GX. A device that most of you have probably never seen in your entire lives. We have the XF86 Video MGX, which I can find literally zero documentation on, and XF86 Video Crime. This is a driver for the crime rendering engine found on the SGI-O2 workstation. Another thing that most of you have probably never interacted with. There are a number of drivers that are accelerated when used in NetBSD, but the acceleration support is missing upstream. This is mostly due to the work of Macallan, who has diligently worked on drivers for accelerators found on SPARC and PowerPC hardware. This is hardware that is still technically supported on Linux. Debian, for example, still does provide support for these platforms, but support is very, very slowly fading out of the very few other distros that do retain this kind of legacy support. You're very unlikely to see any new distros that pop up aiming to support this hardware. Xorg has historically supported two 2D acceleration modes, XAA and EXA. XAA seems complicated. According to the Xorg Foundation, it supports accelerating pattern fills and Bressenham lines. That's about how I felt when I first read that as well. XAA was removed from the Xorg server in 2012, and many old drivers were not updated to support the newer and simpler EXA model, except in NetBSD over a time period of several years. Look, to be fair, I don't understand how EXA works either. I am not a graphics guy, I don't work on Xorg, I have no idea how this is supposed to work, but if they say it's simpler, I'm gonna take their word for it. Here is something you may not have known. NVIDIA used to have an open source graphics driver. It supported 2D acceleration for a range of cards. In NetBSD, it's retained for platforms that include embedded NVIDIA chips that aren't capable of, or predate, or don't want, the modern Novo driver. 6 years ago, it was updated in NetBSD to support EXA acceleration. Now, when I talk about an NVIDIA open source driver, this has nothing to do with the modern kernel module. This was dropped back in 2010. Historically, NVIDIA developed and maintained the XF86 Video NVX driver, primarily as a very minimal driver that works well enough to give users accelerated X rendering from the time they install their Linux distribution until the time they install the NVIDIA driver available from NVIDIA.com, that being the proprietary NVIDIA driver. They were still trying to funnel you into using that, but they at least had something there just for the beginning. However, the rendering needs of a modern X Windows system desktop have changed drastically in recent years to rely heavily on the X-Render extension, which is not well accelerated in the NV driver. At this point on a modern X desktop, the NV driver does not offer much beyond what is provided by the stock VESA X driver. Providing proper render acceleration in the NV driver would be a substantial task. I don't know if you saw this, but that just fell over. A substantial task, and would require diverting significant engineering resources away from NVIDIA's NVIDIA.com driver. For this reason, NVIDIA is dropping support on new GPUs for the XF86 Video NV driver. This is something they absolutely could have properly supported further and made the NVIDIA.com driver also open source. But they weren't going to do that. There are a few ways our X integration could be improved. While lots of attention has been paid to the server, less had been paid to the clients, the programs. Did you know that X includes a text editor, and that text editor supports syntax highlighting and spell checking? This looks really bad. This is an application called Xedit. It is a functional text editor. You can use it to write text. But also, every single desktop you're going to install has a text editor included. And if it doesn't have a text editor included, there are so many other text editors out there that do a better job, that look better than this. I don't really think it makes any sense to focus on making sure that this works well. NetBSD includes its own command line spell checker and associated dictionaries, spell, inherited from the BSD Unix of yore. It's pretty basic and only supports variations of English, which already means it's basically useless for most of the world. To get spell checking to work in Xedit, you need to install iSpell, another command line spell checker from package source, install a dictionary, then set some X resources or create symlinks to make sure Xedit finds iSpell. This could surely be streamlined by teaching Xedit about spell. Or, follow along with me here, we let the really bad old application live in the past where it belongs, and we use modern text editors that are a lot more streamlined. Or even, I don't know, Vim and Emacs make it considerably simpler than this. We also ship every program that has been included with historical Xorg distributions. This includes well-known things like Xterm, and slightly less well-known things like XBIF, and obscurities like bitmap. XBIF is a program that you've probably never run in your entire life. The XBIF program displays a little image of a mailbox. When there is no mail, the flag on the mailbox is down. When mail arrives, the flag goes up and the mailbox beeps. Also, I love the bug section. The mailbox bitmaps are ugly. That's not a bug, but sure, we can work with that. Now, bitmap is a bitmap editor and converter utility for the X window system. Apparently, a 1-bit per pixel alternative to MS Paint. A while ago, we removed some libraries which are no longer used by the modern X server, and maybe we should evaluate whether we need all of these programs too. I'm almost certain you don't need XBIF. You probably don't need bitmap either. Maybe you could possibly argue to keep it around, but you definitely don't need to include XBIF. Just put it in a separate package. XMH is a front end for a mail system that isn't included in base. Together, bitmap and XMH are around 300 kilobytes. For that reason, it's fine to keep it around if you want to, but like, does it need to be there? So XMH lets you send and read mail with an X interface to MH. MH is something you probably never used. XMH is a front end for a mail system that isn't included in base. Together, bitmap and XMH are around 300 kilobytes. Now, XMH is a front end for a thing called MH. Another thing, as we've gone through before, that you probably never interacted with in your entire life. While we have many useful simple programs by default, a clock, a calculator, an editor, a window manager, a compositor, a terminal emulator, we're notably missing a screen locking program for X in the default install, although we have a lock for the TTY. The big question, does all this have a future? The good news is that all new hardware has generic support in X. Someone writes either a mode setting kernel driver or a classical WS display kernel driver, and they will be automatically supported by the associated drivers in X. The bad news is that to have applications running, we require access to a larger open source ecosystem, and that ecosystem has a lot of churn and is easily distracted by shiny new squirrels. I have a feeling the squirrel in this case might be referring to Wayland. The process of upstreaming stuff to Xorg is an ongoing process, but it's likely will run to things that will never be suitable for upstream. Of course, on NetBSD, you also have the option of trying vanilla modular Xorg from package source or using something else entirely. The something else entirely was a frame buffer Twitter client. Now, considering the state Twitter's in today, this would be very broken because of all the whole API stuff, but I guess this was a thing at one point. I personally have no interest in living in NetBSD land or just OpenBSD land in general, but it's always interesting to go see what's actually going on over on that site, because Linux is by far the biggest part of the Unix world, but it's not the only part. There is a lot of stuff going on in the BSD world. They're all doing their own little thing, and it always seems like there's something interesting happening over on that side. So I hope you learned something about how NetBSD does Xorg, and I don't know what you're going to use that knowledge for, but let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you liked the video, go like the video, and if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check the Patreon, Scrubs, LiberaPay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I'm not BSD. I don't know.
What is